The act of beatification of Jose Gregorio Hernandez, known as the Doctor of the Poor, was held in Venezuela this Friday. President of Argentina, Alberto Fernandez, announced a 3-week extension of restrictions as COVID-19 cases surge, while neighbouring Brazil has now surpassed 400,000 COVID-19 deaths as the health crisis intensifies. The main Palestinian political factions have agreed to postpone the upcoming elections amidst a dispute with Israel over voting in occupied East Jerusalem. From the headquarters of teleSUR English in Havana, Cuba, this is From the South, and I'm Katrina Goss. And we begin in Venezuela, where the beatification ceremony of Dr. Jose Gregorio Hernandez was held this Friday under strict health and security measures, according to religious authorities. Only 150 people attended the austere ceremony held in the chapel of La Salle College High School in Caracas to avoid crowds. The religious act, which was attended by the Apostolic Nuncio to Venezuela, Aldo Giordano, was also presided over by the Vatican Secretary of State, Cardinal Pietro Parolin, and the Venezuelan Cardinals Baltasar Porras and Jorge Orosa Sabino. Also present at the ceremony were bishops as well as priests chosen from among congregations of Caracas.
Jose Gregorio invites us to unravel the past in order to face the present and the future with advantages, of which we have the obligation to be protagonists and not mere spectators. We need a good dose of humility to respond to all these demands, to return to the gospel with a thirst for a new man.
And Cardinal Baltasar Porras announced that Pope Francis has named Dr. Jose Gregorio Hernandez co-patron of the Peace Sciences Study Cycle at the Pontifical Lateran University.
Gregorio made us realize that goodness, love and service have no borders. Jose Gregorio belongs to everyone and works for everyone. Even today, Pope Francis has named him co-patron of the Peace Science Study Cycle at the Pontifical Lateran University, the University of the Pope, a symbol in itself, and the consolidation of our responsibility for the common good of our country today.
On Friday, 5 priests, 2 nuns and 2 other people who were held captive for about 3 weeks by kidnappers in Haiti were released, according to Roman Catholic authorities. The France-based Society of Priests of St. James, which runs missions in Haiti and Brazil, said in a statement that the captives were released healthy and unharmed. However, the authorities did not reveal the circumstances surrounding their release or whether a ransom had been paid. 10 people were kidnapped on April 11th as they travelled to a community east of the Haitian capital, Port-au-Prince. The kidnappings prompted the Catholic Church to close its institutions in Haiti, including schools and universities, as part of a 3-day protest. Haiti saw a tripling of reported kidnappings for ransom last year, according to the United Nations. This Friday in Nicaragua, commemorations were held to honour Commander Thomas Bodhi on the 9th anniversary of his death. Thomas Bodhi was a founder of the Sandinista National Liberation Front and was Interior Minister during one of the administrations of President Daniel Ortega. He was also a member of the Nicaraguan Parliament and National Congress and ambassador to Peru. Born in Matagalpa in 1930, at a very young age, Bodhi joined the resistance against the Somoza dictatorship. At the time of his death, he was 81 and had continued to be active in politics while serving as ambassador in Lima, Peru. In Guatemala, the Pakaya volcano, located 25 kilometers south of the capital, is spouting lava, raising fears it may spread to nearby communities. The current eruption is releasing lava to the ground as opposed to an explosive eruption with violent expulsions of smoke and ash. Strong eruptive activity of almost 3 months ended last Friday, which had kept the country in suspense, especially as the lava reached a distance of just 400 meters from the first inhabited houses of the villages nestled on the skirts of the volcano. Civil rights organisations in Brazil are outraged after the Carrefour supermarket chain sought to pay off the widow of an Afro-Brazilian man who was beaten and killed by its security guards in Porto Alegre last November. Our correspondent Brian May has the story.
November 20th, the brutal murder of Afro-Brazilian father of four Beto Freitas in the parking lot of a Carrefour in Porto Alegre by Carrefour security guards shocked the nation, and national protests ensued. This week, Carrefour announced to the press that it had just deposited 1.1 million reais in the bank account of Freitas' widow. She had not asked for this amount. She'd been asking for much more. In dollar terms, this comes out to about $205,000. And what's angered civil rights activists across the country is that the value that Carrefour spontaneously deposited in her bank account was less than a fine they paid in 2019 when their security guards killed a dog in the parking lot of a Carrefour in Osasco, São Paulo. According to human rights lawyer Carlos Barata, there are two reasons why people are angry about what's just happened. First of all, there's the question of the value amount, lower than that for a dog. It's as if Carrefour is saying that a dog's life is worth more to them than an Afro-Brazilian man. Secondly, it's the way that they did it. They announced that they'd made the deposit to the press before his widow had even found out about it. She lives in a favela in a poor section of Porto Alegre with a heavy organized crime presence, and she told her lawyers that immediately after the news hit the media, people started knocking on her door asking to borrow money. Now, Brazil has a long history of lottery winners being kidnapped, mugged, or even killed after the news of their winnings reaches the press. So they've basically put her personal security in danger. Pressure is mounting against Carrefour, and the hope is that this fight can go internationally so that Carrefour can be pressured in France so they can be shamed for giving such a low amount at a moment when the family of George Floyd just received $27 million from the Minneapolis city government. The black movement in Porto Alegre is considering this offer from Carrefour to be a disgrace.
And we'll be right back after this very short break, so don't go away. Welcome back to From the South. This Friday, Chilean Union Federation, the Workers' United Centre, called national strike action to protest against the mishandling of the COVID-19 crisis by the government of Sebastián Piñera. Under the motto Bread, Work, Health and Dignity, the protest is an early celebration of International Workers' Day, but without the large-scale street demonstrations of previous years due to the ongoing pandemic. More than 35,000 workers joined the strike action, which seeks to highlight the discontent with the measures implemented by the government. Among the demands are a minimum wage for all Chileans, a universal basic income for 80% of the population, and measures to fight the spread of the virus. Colombia's Institute for Development and Peace Studies reported the murder of another social leader this Thursday in Caldas department. According to the Institute, Wilson Lopez was shot dead while walking through his local community on Wednesday afternoon. The community leader had encouraged the return of dozens of people who were victims of forced displacement by paramilitary and guerrilla groups. A total of 57 social and community leaders have been killed so far this year in Colombia, while the total number murdered since the signing of the 2016 peace agreement stands at 1,173. On Wednesday, Colombians took to the streets as part of a national strike, which among other demands denounced the escalating violence in the country and the systematic assassinations of social, community, trade union and indigenous leaders. President of Argentina, Gregorio Hernandez, announced a 3-week extension of restrictions, including the cancellation of in-person classes at schools in the Buenos Aires metropolitan area until May 21st, as COVID-19 cases continue to surge, with the total number of infections nearing 3 million. The president warned that the next few weeks could be very hard, while noting that the measures announced on April 7th are showing good results, but the number of cases remains very high. He described the epidemiological situation in the metropolitan area of Buenos Aires as critical, adding that several other areas of the country present a concerning situation. In low-risk areas, local governors are empowered to take additional measures at an early stage to reduce movement and prevent the spread of infection. Meanwhile, government efforts are ongoing to accelerate the vaccination campaign, with 10 million doses of different vaccines already secured.
For the whole country, the same measures that are currently in place will be maintained until May the 21st. The next few weeks may become very hard in terms of the occupation of intensive care beds, so we must continue with the measures to ensure that everyone can access to health care they need and deserve.
Brazil has now surpassed 400,000 COVID-19 deaths as the country struggles to secure vaccines and contain the health crisis. According to the Health Ministry, more than 3,000 people died in the last 24 hours, a number that has rocketed since the beginning of the year. From January to mid-March, the death toll rose from 200,000 to 300,000, and in just over a month it's already risen another 100,000. Meanwhile, a parliamentary commission is investigating the handling of the health crisis by President Jair Bolsonaro and his government, accused of criminal negligence. And the World Health Organization discussed the critical situation in Brazil as the country surpassed the grim milestone of 400,000 coronavirus deaths.
Weeks, much of the world's attention has focused on India. And although that country remains in the grip of a severe crisis, we're encouraged by the demonstration of international support for India. At the same time, we must remember that many other countries all over the world are still experiencing intense transmission. As you know, Brazil is one of the countries that has been hit hardest by the COVID-19 pandemic. Since the beginning of November, Brazil has experienced an acute crisis with increasing cases, hospitalizations and deaths, including among younger people. During April, intensive care units have been at almost full capacity across the country.
The government of Ecuador has claimed that the measures implemented to tackle the spread of the coronavirus are working. However, these claims contrast with the opinions of the country's main medical associations. Our correspondent Denise Herrera brings us more in the following report.
Ecuador remains on alert due to the new wave of COVID-19 infections. According to the authorities, the focused confinement program implemented in 16 provinces is beginning to show promising results.
There is already a reduction in the number of occupied beds with COVID, both in ICU and hospitalization. We have already noticed that there is an impact on the waiting lists and that we have lowered at least 30 percentage points from the previous baseline when we adopted the state of emergency.
Ecuador is also planning to celebrate the May 1st public holiday, where authorities have reiterated that the protocol and restriction enforced must be respected.
We make a patriotic call that on Friday there will be no activities because we cannot suspend a holiday as it is in the law, but we citizens must continue to take care of ourselves. The situation of the hospitals continues to be critical.
However, doctors do not feel the same way. Different medical associations in the country have been demanding measures that will really have an effect on the hospitals that are still collapsed. They even argue that these measures could have the opposite results.
We have criticized the measures of the Emergency Operations Center. We request a focused but total confinement. We believe that these partial measures may even be counterproductive.
Authorities also reported that 595,699 citizens have received the first dose of vaccination and 220,476 have received the second dose, for a total of 816,175 people vaccinated in Ecuador. A plan that has been criticized for the long lines, disorganization and favoritism at the beginning of the plan, where priority was given to vaccinate family members and employees close to the government and not frontline personnel.
India's daily COVID-19 death toll surpassed 3,800 on Friday, marking a new grim record for the Asian nation. As of late April, India has reported over 2,000 fatalities per day. In many Indian cities, the hospital bed occupancy rate is too high to cope with new admissions of COVID-19 patients, and healthcare institutions are facing a severe shortage of oxygen and medical supplies. The Indian government announced it would open vaccination facilities to all adults from Saturday in an effort to curb infections. Authorities had previously limited shots to those aged over 45 and certain other groups. However, several states have warned that they do not have sufficient vaccine stocks, and the expanded rollout is threatened by administrative issues, confusion over prices and technical glitches on the government's digital vaccine platform. And we have more stories coming up after this final short break, so stay with us. Welcome back to From the South. Palestinian President Mahmoud Abbas announced that the main political factions have agreed to postpone the first elections planned in 15 years, citing a dispute with Israel over voting in the occupied territory of East Jerusalem.
Faced with this difficult situation, we decided to postpone the date of holding legislative election until the participation of Jerusalem and its people in this election is guaranteed. There will be no concession of Jerusalem and no concession on the right of our people in Jerusalem to exercise their democratic right.
More than 40 people were killed in a stampede early Friday at a Jewish religious festival attended by tens of thousands of people in northern Israel. Officials reported that over 150 people were injured. Thousands had gathered at the foot of Mount Meron to celebrate Lag BaOmer, a Jewish holiday. It was the first huge religious gathering of its kind to be held illegally since Israel lifted nearly all restrictions related to the coronavirus pandemic. Video posted on social media appeared to show angry crowds jeering at Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu during his visit to the site in the wake of the tragedy, as they blamed his government and the police for the disaster. Despite military, economic and political pressure from the United States and its allies, the presidential election process continues according to schedule in Syria. The authorities have noted that they're sparing no effort to ensure the electoral process is successful and far removed from any foreign interference. Our correspondent Hisham Wanas brings us more details in the following report.
The deadline for the submission of applications for candidates to the general elections, which last 10 days, ended on Wednesday, April 28th, with 51 applicants, including 7 women, and the current president Bashar al-Assad. According to the general electoral law of Syria, each candidate must obtain the support of 35 members of parliament for his or her candidacy to be valid.
I appreciate the efforts you have made, in accordance with the rule of the Constitution and the duties of the Assembly, to express your support to your candidates for the presidential election of the Syrian Arab Republic, and that you have done so inspired by your conscience, and placing the patriotic interest above anything else. It is a new victory for Syria to hold these elections on the date scheduled under the Constitution, and we invite all our compatriots inside and outside Syria to exercise their right to vote and to ensure broad patriotic participation in these elections in defense of the unity, independence, sovereignty, and territorial integrity of Syria.
The second phase of the process began this Thursday, April 29th, with the delivery to the Supreme Constitutional Court of the box that contains the votes of the members of parliament for the nominees. The judicial body will study all the applications to run for office and will rule on them within the established legal term of 5 days, after which hopefuls whose applications were rejected may appeal to the court and receive a response to their appeal within 6 days.
The Supreme Constitutional Court will study and legally examine the nomination files for the presidential elections, and once the legal study of the application is completed, in accordance with the constitutional and legal conditions, the court will announce the names of the candidates whose applications were accepted.
Syria has suffered a fierce war and is the victim of a major global conspiracy. But the Syrian people remain steadfast and offer no concessions regarding the sovereignty of their homeland and their national principles, and therefore they support these elections, which we hope will be successful and lead to the election of the appropriate presidential candidate.
The voting will take place on May 20th for the Syrians living abroad, and on the 26th of the same month for those living in the country, an election that the parliaments of friendly countries such as Venezuela, Cuba, Bolivia, Ecuador and Nicaragua were invited to follow closely and which, in defiance of attempts of Washington and its allies, to obstruct it. The government and citizens of the country vow to comply with, in a sovereign manner and by virtue of the Syrian constitution approved in the referendum of 2011.
A ceasefire on the border between Kyrgyzstan and Tajikistan has been agreed after intense fighting between the two Central Asian neighbours that killed some 40 people and wounded over 170. Russia, as well as the European Union, had voiced their concern about the conflict over the disputed border. More than 7,000 Kerch residents have been evacuated from the area as troops from the two countries exchanged gunfire around a water supply facility near the village of Koktash, located in western Kyrgyzstan on the border with Tajikistan. Both nations have claimed area around the water supply facility, a dispute dating back decades to when they were both part of the Soviet Union. In a meeting between high-ranking officials, the two nations came to a mutual agreement to end the armed conflict and withdraw troops and military equipment. The Russian government has responded to European Union sanctions with equivalent measures, including against the head of the European Parliament. The Kremlin informed that 8 citizens of the European Union have been included on a list of those sanctioned in response to the bloc's measures against Russia. Among those targeted by the new measures are the Vice President of the European Commission for Values and Transparency and the President of the European Parliament, as well as other representatives of the official structures of the bloc. The sanctions prevent the officials from entering Russian territory. Belgium has sent 9,000 doses of the antiviral drug remdesivir to India as part of the European Union's response to the growing COVID emergency in the Asian nation. On Friday, India broke another global record for daily coronavirus infections in a devastating wave which now accounts for more than 40% of the world's new cases and has overwhelmed hospitals and crematoriums. Meanwhile, more than 40 countries have committed to sending medical aid to the country, while the Indian diaspora has also sprung into action to locate desperately needed supplies. As of Saturday, vaccination will be open to all adults in India, meaning around 600 million more people will be eligible. Until now, only frontline workers like medical staff, people aged over 45 and those with underlying illnesses have been given shots. But several states have warned that they do not have sufficient vaccine stocks and the expanded rollout is threatened by administrative issues. On Friday, Indonesia's military and families paid their last respects to the 53 submarine crew members who died when their vessel sank and broke apart in the depths of the sea off the coast of Bali. Indonesia is planning to recover the submarine with the help of a Chinese Navy ship that's capable of lifting objects from 1,000 meters deep. According to the Indonesian Navy, the submarine sank on April 21st to a depth much deeper than its collapse depth of 200 meters, at which point water pressure would be greater than the hull could withstand. The President met the relatives of the crew members on Thursday and expressed his condolences. The Defence Ministry said the German-built submarine had been in service since 1981. And we've come to the end of this news brief, but remember you can find these and many other stories on our website at telesurenglish.net. You can also follow us on social media. We're on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram and Telegram. For teleSUR English, I'm Katrina Garson. Thank you for watching.